My name is Dorothy, but everyone calls me Grandma Dot. Well, when they remember I exist, that is. In the kitchen still has the same faded roses I put up when my late husband Frank was alive. And the creaky floorboard by the front door still announces every visitor, though those visits have become fewer and farther between. It's November 15th, and I'm sitting at my kitchen table, stirring my morning coffee while watching the first snow of the season go with her husband Tom, claiming she needed a fresh start after her divorce. They call, sometimes. They visit, occasionally. But I've noticed something that cuts deeper than any winter wind. I've become background noise in their lives. Last week, Michael stopped by to drop off Emma after school. She loved. "Mom, we gotta go. Emma, get your stuff." I stood in the doorway, watching them leave. Michael kissed my forehead, a quick, distracted peck, and said, "Thanks for watching her. You're a lifesaver." But I didn't feel like a lifesaver. I felt like a convenience store, always open, always available, never truly appreciated. The house felt even quieter after they. I picked up the phone to call Lisa, but then I remembered she'd mentioned something about a yoga retreat this week. Or was it last week? The days blur together when you're living in the margins of other people's lives. Alive, forgotten by the very people I spent my life loving and nurturing. I closed, like snow accumulating on the windowsill. It started as a whisper of rebellion in my mind and grew into something more concrete with each passing day. What if I just thing in return? I spent the next week observing my family. Conversations were always the same. "How you doing, Mom?" Followed by a 10-minute monologue about his work stress, Sarah's book club drama, and the kids' activities. He rarely waited. She'd ask about his dating adventure and promised to visit soon. Soon had become a relative term that seemed to stretch longer each month. The breaking point came on November 28th. Emma had a school play. She was, "Oh, Mom," and I could hear the apology already forming in his voice. "I'm so sorry, but we can't make it to the play. Sarah's mother in town, and we promised to take her to that new steakhouse downtown." "But Emma's been practicing her lines for weeks. She told me she wanted me to see her be the best tree ever." I know. We'll make it up to her. Maybe this weekend?" Maybe. Another maybe to add to the collection of broken promises and half-hearted commitments. And with it, the holiday season that used to bring such joy to my life. But now the thought of Christmas made my chest feel tight. I remembered last Christmas. Michael's family came over for dinner, but they spent most of the time on their phones. Lee's decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I walked to my bedroom and pulled out the old suitcase Frank and I used for our honeymoon. It smelled like lavender and memories. I was going to disappear. Not forever, but long enough for them to notice the void I left behind. Long enough for them to realize that I wasn't just a piece of furniture in their lives. I had 6 weeks to plan my vanishing act, and I was going to make it count. Planning my disappearance became my secret project, and for the first time in years, I felt alive with turn when I was ready. I found a place called Whispering Pines Inn in a small town called Millbrook, about 3 hours south. The website showed a cozy Victorian house surrounded by snow-covered trees, with a fireplace in every room and a proprietary. I made a reservation for December 20th through January 5th using a credit card I'd kept hidden in my jewelry box. The hardest part was preparing my house for my absence without arousing suspicion. I couldn't just stop my maid Peterson to keep an eye on the house while I was visiting an old friend. I arranged for my regular grocery delivery to be suspended temporarily. I even pre-wrote checks for my monthly bills and left them in envelopes with future demands. I noticed something that made my heart ache. I was standing slightly apart from everyone else, my smile forced, my posture suggesting I was ready to bolt at any moment. Had I already been disappearing, piece by piece, year by year? Would have been overjoyed. The new Dorothy, the one planning her escape, felt a pang of guilt mixed with resolve. "That sounds wonderful, honey," I said, my voice steady despite the churning in my stomach. "Should I bring anything? Sarah was thinking of making her famous green bean casserole." "No, don't worry about it. I'll handle everything." But I wouldn't handle everything. For the first time to celebrate. I picked up my phone and dialed Lisa's number. She answered on the fourth ring, slightly out of breath. I was wondering about Christmas. Are you still planning to call? Of course, we always do Christmas calls, don't we? Yes, I said quietly. We always do. But this year, the phone would ring in an empty house. December 18th marked what I privately called the last. Spent the entire day cooking, pouring love into every pot roast with carrots and potatoes, the way Frank used to love it. I prepared Emma's favorite mashed sweet potatoes and Jake's beloved cornbread stuffing. For dessert, I baked an apple pie from on time for once. Jake burst through the door first, his energy filling the room like sunshine. At 12, he was all arms and legs and enthusiasm. And seeing him reminded me why I'd fallen in love with being a grandmother in the first place. "Grandma Dot, something smells amazing," he said, wrapping me in a hug that felt genuine and warm. Emma followed more quietly. At 15, she was at that awkward age where showing affection to grandparents wasn't considered cool, but she managed a smile and a brief hug. "Hi, Grandma. Dad said you made sweet potatoes." "Just for you, sweetheart." Michael and Sarah brought wine and flowers, and for a moment, I allowed my
During dinner, I found myself memorizing everything. The way Jake talked with his mouth full, earning a gentle scolding from Sarah. The way Emma actually put down her phone and engaged in conversation about her English class. The way Michael complimented my cooking, saying, "Mom, I don't know how you do it. This is restaurant quality." "Mom, you never told me that story," Emma led, looking at each of them. "Maybe someday we'll have more time." As they prepared to leave, Sarah surprised me by lingering in the kitchen. "Dorothy, dinner was incredible. I know we don't say it enough, but we really appreciate everything you do for us. Maybe things could change. Maybe this evening was a sign that we could rebuild our relationship." But then Michael gave me his usual distracted kiss on the forehead, said, and the lingering scent of family. I allowed myself to cry, for what I was losing, for what I'd already lost, and for the woman I was about to become. Cold, with the kind of bitterness. I woke up at 5:30 a.m., earlier than usual, my body seemingly aware that this was no ordinary day. I lay in bed for a few minutes, listening to the house creak and settle around me, committing its sounds to memory.
I'd packed my suitcase the night before. Just the essentials, a week's worth of warm clothes, my medications, a few books, and the small photo of Frank that I kept on my nightstand. My last act before leaving was to write a note. Not an explanation, not a goodbye, but something that would ensure my absence was noticed without causing panic. I placed it on questions, clear enough to prevent a missing persons report. I turned off the lights, locked the front door, and loaded my suitcase into my old Honda Civic. Hours and 13 minutes. I drove carefully, my hands gripping the steering. Smaller towns, then to countryside, dotted with farms and patches of forest, but a sense of possibility I hadn't experienced in years. Whispering Pines Inn was exactly. Smoke curled from the chimney, and warm light glowed from the windows. It looked like something greeted me at the door. She was about my age, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. I wondered if my need for peace was that obvious, or if Helen simply understood that people who came to places like this were always looking for something.
My room was on the second floor, overlooking the garden. It was small but comfortable, with a fireplace, a reading chair by the window, and a bed covered in a quilt that looked handmade. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. And I have just done the most terrifying and exhilarating thing I've done since Frank died. To be. As evening approached, I joined exactly what I needed. No one asked probing questions or expected me to be anything other than what I was in that moment. A woman figuring out how to be alone without being lonely. Later, as I prepared for bed, I wondered what my family was doing. Were they thinking about sugar? I woke up in my room at Whispering Pines, with sunshine streaming through frost-covered windows and the distant sound of church bells from town. For a moment, I forgot where I was and why I was there. Then reality settled in. This was my first Christmas morning in 47 years with Helen about gardening, travel, and the books we'd loved. Conversations that didn't revolve around other people's problems or needs. But Christmas morning was different. Christmas morning was the test. Christmas morning was the test. I dressed slowly, pulling on the red sweater Lisa had given me last year, the one I'd never worn because there was never an occasion special enough. Today felt special enough. I prepared a special Christmas breakfast for the guests. Homemade cinnamon rolls, fresh fruit, and coffee that tasted like heaven. We ate in comfortable silence. My daughter's age, who was recovering from a difficult divorce. "Would you like to join us for Christmas dinner?" asked Helen as we finished breakfast. "I'm making roast chicken with all the fixings." That sounds wonderful. In it every day, documenting not just my activities, but my emotional journey. Today's entry was different. Christmas morning, and I am not cooking for anyone. I am not cleaning up alone while they retired to the living room by a window, watching snow fall. I am wearing a sweater that makes me feel pretty. I am exactly where I want to be. But I would be lying if I said I wasn't wondering what's happening at Brook was the kind of town that Norman Rockwell would have painted. A main street lined with shops, houses with front porches, and a town square with a gazebo. Most businesses were closed for Christmas, and creating memories.
I passed a phone booth, an actual phone booth, something I hadn't seen in years, and felt a strong urge to call home, just to hear their voices, to know they were okay, to maybe ease this gnawing anxiety in my chest. But I didn't. This was my Christmas, my choice, my statement. If I called now, I'd undo everything I was trying to accomplish. Helen's careful script. For a moment, I wavered. What if something was conversation, distracted, hurried, taking my presence for granted? If there was a real emergency, the paper and putting it in my pocket, I'll hand dinner was delicious, the conversation warm and genuine. We shared our marriage when we had so little money but so much joy. As I prepared for bed that night, I wrote in my journal, "They noticed. They called. They are worried. This means my absence has weight, has meaning. I am not invisible after all. I am simply taken for granted." I fell asleep to the sound of wind in the pine trees, feeling both guilty and liberated. I had chosen myself, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, it was just beginning.
By December 28th, Helen informed me that my phone had been ringing almost constantly, had called asking if I was safe and in my right mind. Each message grew more frantic, more desperate, more filled with the kind of concern that had been absent from their voices for years. The guilt came from imagining their worry, their confusion, their growing. Tell them when they call again, Helen asked gently. She'd been watching me navigate this family crisis with the wisdom of someone who'd probably seen similar situations before. I'm safe, I'm healthy, and but I've never seen someone handle a situation with as much grace and purpose as you're showing. Whatever you're working through, you're doing it right. Or demanding too much. But sitting in that cozy breakfast room, surrounded by the scent of Helen's homemade muffins and the sound of her genuine support, I felt my resolve sky like delicate ink drawings. I sat on a bench that some thoughtful person had placed there and opened my journal. Punish my family. I disappeared to find myself, to remember who Dorothy is when she's not constantly giving pieces of herself away. I've been so focused on being the perfect grandmother, the helpful mother, the woman who never says no, that I forgot I'm also a person with needs, wants, and boundaries. Very taken for granted, but not strong. Strength feels like. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I made a decision. I would stay through New Year's Day as planned, for my return, not as the same woman who had left, but as someone something. I wanted to look up information about setting boundaries with adult children, about healthy family dynamics, about how to rebuild relationships on equal footing. What I found surprised me. There were hundreds of articles, support groups, and resources for people exactly like me, grandparents and parents who had lost themselves in the endless cycle of giving without receiving. I wasn't alone in this struggle. I wasn't being about love, respect, and mutual appreciation. Hope that Dorothy, not just Grandma Dot, would have a place at the table. But first, I had to finish what I'd started. I had to see this through to the end. Needs to see you. My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. How did he find me? Different. Not angry, not demanding, just worried and determined. I felt my carefully constructed peace begin to crack. My family had finally realized they needed to make an effort to reach me. "When will he be here?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. He said around 2 o'clock. I had 6 hours to prepare for the conversation that would determine everything that came next. I spent the morning. 2:15 p.m., I heard a car door slam in the parking lot. He looked older than I remembered, more worn down, and I felt a familiar pang of maternal concern. "Dorothy, your son is here. Would you like me to show him up, or would you prefer to meet downstairs?" "Downstairs, please, in the sitting room." I took a deep breath, checked my appearance in the mirror, and went to face my son. Michael was standing by the fireplace when I entered, still wearing his winter coat, his hair mussed from the drive. When he saw me, his expression shifted from determination to relief to something that looked like pain. "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked slightly. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Michael. Please sit down." He remained standing, as if sitting would somehow make this conversation less urgent. "Mom, what is this about? We've been worried sick. Lisa flew in from I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, loved, worried about, and supported for 45 years, and realized that this was the first time in months that he was truly seeing me, not as a convenience or a given, but as a person whose absence had created a void in his life. "Future? When was the last time you considered that I might be lonely or sad or need something more than just being useful to your family?" His face began to change. "Or do you include me when it's convenient, when you need your problems without offering any problems of my own?" Michael finally sat down, his coat still on, his hands clasped between his knees. "I had no idea you felt this way. I've been trying to tell you." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of my words settling between us. I could see Michael processing, remembering, beginning to understand. "What can I do? How can I fix this?" "You can start by seeing me, not as Grandma Dot, not as Mom who's always there, but as Dorothy, a woman who has her own life, her own needs, her own value beyond what she can do for others." Michael nodded slowly. Michael stayed at the inn that night, booking a room so we could continue our conversation over dinner. It was awkward at first. We hadn't spent this much uninterrupted time together in years. But gradually, we began to talk like two adults instead of mother and son trapped in outdated roles. Been years of feeling like I'm performing my role as grandmother and mother without anyone really seeing me as a person. He rubbed his face with his hands. I think I stopped seeing you as having your own life after Dad died. You seemed... But somewhere along the way, I disappeared into that role completely. I became someone who only existed in relation to other people. Giving pieces of herself away needed you to understand what it feels like when someone you love simply isn't there. The next morning, Michael called Sarah and put her on speakerphone. I could hear Emma and Jake in the background, their voices carrying a turn in her voice. Concern in her voice.